10 o'clock, this is Sky News at 10. Our top story, an attack with corrosive chemicals on the streets of London. The suspect on the run after wounding a mother and her daughters. The police hunt the alleged attacker, who has distinct facial injuries and who, Sky News understands, is an ex-asylum seeker known to the victims. Also tonight, it's not just prices that could be cut, while lower inflation is feeding the prospect of lower interest rates, as the Bank of England tells us the next move is likely to be down.
The next decision is more likely to be when do we cut.
Right, the next decision is more likely to be when do we cut.
But we haven't reached a view on when that will be.
Serving your community wearing a stab vest. The MP abused for supporting Israel, who says he'll quit because enough is enough. Why another victim of the war could be Joe Biden's re-election bid as Arab Americans turn against the presidency in a key battleground state. The call of the wild for one Scottish monkey. But now his 5 days of freedom are finally at an end. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. Police are tonight hunting a suspect they believe carried out an attack with corrosive chemicals on a mother and her 2 children in London. They say Abdul Shokoor Ezedi is dangerous and should not be approached. Sky News understands he's an ex-asylum seeker, granted asylum only on his 3rd attempt. The woman and one of her daughters have suffered what the police said could be life-changing injuries in an attack caught on video obtained by Sky News. Our correspondent, Ashna Haranag, reports.
An attack with a powerful chemical on the streets of southwest London, caught on CCTV. This video shows a man running around a car before getting into the driver's seat. In the headlights, a woman and a child raise their hands to their faces. The man then charges the car towards them, knocking the woman to the ground. The vehicle stops abruptly and the driver gets out. He opens the back door. He appears to then take a child from the back seat and then throws her to the ground. This is the police's suspect, 35-year-old Abdul Shokoor Ezedi, now the subject of a nationwide manhunt.
The guy, he tried to run the woman over first. The woman had a child with her and she started banging on the window of the driver's seat. So when she started banging on the window of the driver's seat, I think, at first I thought he pepper sprayed her because she came running over here screaming, my eyes, my eyes. Then the neighbours came out and started helping her. Then what happened was he went to the back seat, came out, he dragged the little child and smashed the child on the floor. And then when people started running to him, he grabbed the child again and smashed them on the floor.
According to police, this is the last known sighting of Ezedi, just under an hour and a half after the incident on Wednesday night, buying a bottle of water in North London with distinctive facial injuries. They say he's dangerous.
If you see him, I plead to not approach him. He's a 90, call 999. He has significant injuries to the right side of his face.
Sky News understands Ezedi is a former asylum seeker who had his application denied twice before being granted the right to stay.
Superintendent, was he a British national?
There's still some ongoing inquiries in that field. I'm not sure.
It's also understood that Ezedi was convicted of a sexual offence in 2018, for which he was handed a suspended sentence and an unpaid work order. Police in the capital are working with the Northumbria force as the suspect is from Newcastle. This business owner almost sold Ezedi a car last year.
One thing I can tell him about him is he's very, very persistent kind of a guy. He doesn't let go of things very easy.
This morning, this street was saturated with water after the fire brigade had been down here to cleanse this area. The road has now reopened as the focus of the investigation has moved elsewhere. But for these residents, they're still focused on that mother and her daughters and how they came to be attacked by someone they knew.
The 31-year-old woman and her daughters, who are 8 and 3 years old, are still in hospital. Injuries she and her toddler suffered are said to be life-changing. Meanwhile, the man behind the horror is still on the run.
And Ashna joins me now, and clearly there's still a lot of questions about the suspect and the attack. What are the police saying tonight?
Well, where Abdul Ezedi is tonight, Gillian, is completely unknown and is still a mystery. We know the 35-year-old is from Newcastle and that he drove that white car which was involved in that incident last night. We've also been learning a little bit more about this man. We know now and we understand that he is a former asylum seeker that was only recently granted the right to stay. We know that he was also in 2018 convicted of a sexual offence, either relating to sexual assault or exposure. We know that once he'd finished that unpaid work order, he was then discharged by the probation service. He was last seen, of course, at 9 o'clock last night in a Tesco supermarket in North London, near King's Cross or Euston Station. Significant, of course, because those are some quite substantial, large transport hubs and is therefore well connected to the north of the country. And that is why we know that this is a manhunt that is spanning swathes of miles from London all the way up to Northumberland. We know that Northumbria police are assisting the British Transport Police and the Met too. Tonight in London, additional officers are walking the streets in an attempt to find this man. The public have been told if you see him, do not approach him, but do call 999.
Ashna, thank you. For months, the Bank of England simply wouldn't engage with talk of reductions in interest rates. Today, that changed as the bank's governor, Andrew Bailey, told our economics editor he expects the next move will be down. The reason why? The strongest sign yet, the bank believes inflation may finally be under control. In October 2022, prices had increased 11.1% compared to a year before, which was a 41-year high. Since then, inflation has fallen, and the bank gave a date today, April, when it expects it will get back, at least temporarily, to its 2% target. The question then, when interest rates held again today at 5.25%, will follow, as Ed Conway reports.
What goes up must come down. Until today, the Bank of England had been telling everyone that the next move in interest rates was likely to be upwards. Now the governor says that's changed.
So I think, to be clear, I think, therefore, really the decision, unless the world changes, and of course, unfortunately, the world does change, and particularly at the moment, the next decision is more likely to be when do we cut.
Right, the next decision is more likely to be when do we cut.
But we haven't reached a view on when that will be.
Why the change in stance? Well, partly because inflation's coming down faster than expected, forecast to touch the bank's 2% target briefly in April. But partly it's because the economy is really struggling.
It's a bit slow after January because we're still trying to get free sale.
Yeah.
So we're starting to get all the new stuff in.
You can see the signs here on the high street.
It was a slower December than we had hoped for. We didn't have that big push before Christmas, the way, kind of that rush of people coming that we would normally expect to see before Christmas, which was a bit disappointing.
Was that a surprise?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it obviously affected our sales quite a bit.
Today, the bank left rates on hold, but the real question is, what's next?
So now we know the next move is likely to be down rather than up, but that raises another few questions. When and by how much? Of course, the Bank of England being the Bank of England, they didn't want to comment on that, but they did drop some interesting hints. They said, you know this chart, this one showing interest rate expectations in the coming months, the one that shows them coming down in a few months' time, getting down to 3% in a couple of years, that one looks kind of OK to us.
But there's another thing that might be cut too, taxes. The Chancellor says he'll slash them in next month's budget if he can.
It's difficult to know what the final numbers we're going to have at the budget are. It's still early days. It doesn't look like I'm going to have as much headroom as I had in the autumn statement to bring down taxes. But if I do bring them down, it will be in a responsible way.
But there's an issue here. The governor says those tax cuts could affect the bank's ability to cut rates.
When fiscal policy is announced, we take it into account, as we have done this time, because we've taken the autumn measures into account this time.
You said with the autumn measures, you said actually they were kind of maybe less inflationary than they could have been, but still they were net inflationary. So these things matter, do they, when you're making your decision?
They enter into the whole assessment process.
Tax cuts versus rate cuts, the Treasury versus the bank. As the cost of living crisis cools, this election year is beginning to heat up. Ed Conway, Sky News.
Well, that election year, which Ed referred to, will end, if the opinion polls are right, with Labour's Rachel Reeves running the country's finances. And the potential future Chancellor said today she would have iron discipline. Part of that discipline would be a promise to businesses not to increase corporation tax any higher than it already is. Rachel Reeves spoke to our political editor, Beth Rigby.
Rachel Reeves, she's on her way to becoming Britain's first female Chancellor. Labour well ahead with voters. Today, this industry summit all about sealing the deal with business. Her script now firmly on repeat.
I will never play fast and loose with the public finances. I will not waver from ironclad fiscal rules. I spent the best part of a decade as an economist at the Bank of England.
Wanting to be trusted on the economy and here with a big offer for big business.
The next Labour government will make the pro-business choice and the pro-growth choice. We will cap the headline rate of corporation tax at its current rate of 25% for the duration of the next Parliament. And should our competitiveness come under threat, if necessary, we will act.
A shadow chancellor wanting to give these business leaders certainty about their future. Delegates liking what they hear.
I think I'm really confident about business under any government that's stable, and the key message today has been about stability.
Business want consistency, they want clarity, they plan on different cycles to political cycles, so that was good to see.
But clarity needed on Labour's pledge to invest up to £28 billion a year in green energy. Now the shadow chancellor wobbling in the face of the economic backdrop and fierce Tory attacks. It's pretty clear to me that up to £28 billion a year into green investment will not be Labour policy in its current form at the next general election. That's fair, isn't it?
We want to make those investments alongside business in the opportunities of the future, but everything has to be affordable.
But my question is, given what's happened to public finances, you're saying now that you are backing off from that commitment of up to £28 billion by the end of the next Parliament. That's pretty clear, isn't it?
What people can hear loud and clear is that all of our policies will be fully costed, fully funded and subject to the fiscal rules.
I think what people can hear is you're not answering the question.
Well, all of our policies have got to ensure that debt is falling as a share of GDP and that we're not borrowing for day-to-day spending. But there will be at least one more fiscal event, possibly two, before the next general election, and we need to know what that fiscal inheritance is going to be.
Winning back voters and business has been so hard fought.
I'd like you all to cast your mind back to 2019. Let's imagine that you were invited to an event like this before any of the changes to our party had taken place. The question is, would you go?
They have the room. Can they win the country? Beth Rigby, Sky News, London.
One of Rishi Sunak's ministers told Sky News today that he'll stand down at the next election because of abuse and threats to his life. Mike Ferrari said there comes a point when you have to say enough is enough. He's been targeted in part, he says, because of his pro-Israel views, representing a constituency with thousands of Jewish residents. Our communities correspondent Becky Johnson reports from North London.
Filmed by his team meeting constituents in late October, Mike Ferrari was wearing a stab vest. It's a precaution he took after the revelation that the Islamist who murdered MP Sir David Amess in 2021 had first tried to target him. Death threats over his support for Israel, followed by an arson attack on his office in December, have now led Mr Ferrari to quit politics for his own safety.
The arson attack was just kind of the last straw. In some ways, as members of Parliament, we sign up to a level of it, but it's also the impact on our families and also our staff. And I think there comes a point you say, enough.
In his North London constituency, faces of Israeli hostages have been scratched out. Golders Green is home to a large Jewish community who understand the threat he feels.
It's worrying because, you know, if he's standing down over safe affairs, we're Jewish.
Do you feel safe?
No, not fully, not as safe as we should feel.
And at this kosher supermarket, Yosef had to fend off a man with a knife earlier this week.
Generally, it's not very safe to be
Jewish in London anymore.
And now your Member of Parliament has decided to stand down.
I don't blame him, you know. If he was fearing for his life, he did the right thing.
This man, who's overtly pro-Israel on social media, says he's also had threats. Do you think that some of the content that you're posting is stirring up division and therefore contributing to this atmosphere?
Not really.
He doesn't support his MP's decision to quit.
I think he should have stayed. He should have got more security, maybe.
Down the road, this pro-Palestinian constituent was sorry to see him go.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
What do you make of people feeling so strongly against his views on Israel that they are making death threats?
But it's sad it has come to this, but this is how it is. This is how it is. Life, everything is changing so badly now. And it has to have a stop, the ceasefire in Palestine.
The war in the Middle East has undoubtedly polarised views here in Britain, but it's a sign of just how divisive it is that we now have an MP who feels so unsafe he can no longer do his job. The Speaker of the House of Commons has said he'll protect democracy against people who seek to threaten elected representatives of the British public. Becky Johnson, Sky News, North London.
There are signs that the war between Israel and Hamas is having a political impact in the United States as well. In an election year, some Democrats are worried it could be losing President Biden vital votes. The political impact could be especially pronounced in a state like Michigan. President Biden won there by more than 154,000 votes in 2020. But there are more than 200,000 Muslim voters in the state, and more than 310,000 of them are of Middle Eastern and North African descent. Well, that may be feeding into the latest poll, which suggests Donald Trump would now win 47% of the vote, compared to just 42% for Joe Biden. Our US correspondent James Matthews reports from the city of Dearborn, home to one of America's largest Arab American communities.
Dawn over Detroit, a city that defines Joe Biden's difficulty. They called it for the Democrats at the last election, city and state. But listening to Michigan now, it sounds different. In a must-win swing state, the Muslim community here has swung away from Joe Biden.
The ink that we would use to sign that ballot would be through the blood of our relatives in Palestine.
Their problem is Biden's support for Israel in the Middle East conflict and opposition to a ceasefire.
We want it to be recorded in history that President Biden was a one-term president because of the genocide against the Palestinians that he bankrolled.
In Michigan, people with an Arab or Muslim background far outnumber Biden's winning margin at the last election. It is a community he counted on, now counted out. On the day Joe Biden was visiting this corner of Michigan, we met a man who stood him up. Hi. Among Muslim community leaders who declined an invitation to meet and greet was Democratic State Representative Al-Abbas Farhat. Across the street was the encouragement to vote uncommitted in upcoming Democrat primaries. There's also an abandoned Biden campaign, even if that's to the advantage of his would-be challenger, Donald Trump.
This is what they're saying to the community. They're saying we've held out 4 years under Trump, and we can hold out for another 4 if that means we'll stop the killing of our cousins and our loved ones overseas.
Let's welcome President Joe Biden.
Latest polls show Joe Biden trailing Donald Trump in 7 key swing states.
Thank you.
He has been to Michigan to acknowledge the endorsement of a major car workers union. A president grinding gears could do with the lift.
You all are the ones that brung me to the dance. And I never left you. I never left you.
This is the scene outside the venue of the Biden visit. Come the election, it will be decided on small margins in a small number of swing states. US strikes, new concerns around escalation in the Middle East will add to Biden's burden.
You can either be on the right side of history or you can be on the wrong side of history.
He needs new friends in the likes of Detroit. The place that gave us Motors and Motown music isn't giving him his choice of campaign soundtrack.
Sky's James Matthews there. Let's return now to our top story, and that is the search for the chemical attack suspect, Abdul Ezedi. We have some breaking news on Ezedi's background. Ashna Hurangak is in South London for us. Ashna, what can you tell us?
Well, we know that chemical attack suspect who is currently on the run is a former asylum seeker who was only recently granted asylum. We know as well that in 2018 he had been convicted for a sexual offence relating to sexual assault or exposure, but we now know that it is following that conviction that he was granted asylum in the UK. He was only granted asylum in either 2021, Sky News understands, or 2022. Again, following that conviction. For that offence, he was given a suspended sentence and was ordered to finish off some unpaid work. He arrived also, Abdul Ezedi, in a lorry in 2016. So that breaking news there, that Sky News understands that the suspect, this attacker, Ezedi, was convicted of a sex offence in 2018 and later granted asylum.
Ashna, thank you for that update. 2 teenage boys have been charged with the murder of Mason Rist and Max Dixon, who were stabbed to death in Bristol last week. Mason and Max were aged 15 and 16. The boys charged with their murder are the same ages. They will appear in court tomorrow, along with 2 men accused of helping them. As leaders agreed to give Ukraine billions inside the European Parliament in Brussels, outside, a riot was in full swing. Hundreds of European farmers, angry over taxes and the cost of living, set fires and blocked roads with their tractors today. It's the latest demonstration following weeks of protests around the bloc. Ukraine is claiming it used sea drones to sink a Russian missile boat in the Black Sea during a nighttime attack. Ukraine's military intelligence released video that appears to show the moment of impact, followed by a big explosion. Russian authorities have not yet commented on the attack. Loopholes in the law, which would allow women attending abortion clinics to be approached by pro-life campaigners, may be closed, MPs said today after meeting the Home Secretary. They say draft guidance from the government has watered down new restrictions that were brought in to protect women from harassment. Our political correspondent Serena Barker-Singh reports.
OK, that's perfect. And you know why you're here today, don't you?
Yes.
Good.
Abortion is legal, and if you're seeking help inside a clinic, this is the conversation you'd expect to get.
Just make you sign some things, make sure this is definitely the right decision for you. Okay. Is that OK? Yes. Do you have any concerns about it?
But just outside, it's another story. MPs voted a year ago to create safety zones outside these clinics to stop anti-abortion protesters harassing women. But it's not fully in force yet.
Hey, sorry to bother. We're doing a story on the end of the public consultation on safety zones.
Women at this designated protest zone in Ealing insist they're there not to harass, but to help vulnerable women.
I'm sure you know exactly what brings us here. So.
Yeah. Do you think that it's quite distressing for women who are going to have
not
who
at
are
all.
coming here?
We are just waving to them, saying hello, and can we offer you some help? Would you like a leaflet? That's all what we say.
But you are going up to them and offering.
No, we cannot move from this triangle. That's our spot, so we cannot move from.
It's their spot because the council has enforced a protection order outside a clinic here. But now draft guidance just released by the Home Office allows for some exceptions to buffer zones, angering a coalition of MPs from both sides of the House who originally tabled the legislation.
What we've got out the other end is not what we voted for. There's that many exceptions. I think it says if they're praying, if they're informing, and the informing is often leaflets telling people they're going to hell with anatomically inaccurate diagrams of how big the baby is. So, you know, there's a huge mismatch, and it's come out 2 years later nearly.
Ellie was handed one of those leaflets while waiting for treatment.
After I sort of managed to process it all, I realised that I resented her for it. I think that actually made the sort of healing process, as it were, it made it harder. wasn't something I sort of agreed to overnight. There was a lot of thought with me and my partner, and she undid all of that quite quickly.
The government says they are considering all responses to a public consultation before final guidance is published.
If it stays in its current form, what's in the consultation, do you think that is the Home Office trying to thwart the will of Parliament?
Let's have a proper conversation before we start making accusations.
MPs who met the Home Secretary today say they're now hopeful those loopholes in the guidance will be closed. The aim by the spring. Serena Barker-Singh, Sky News.
One of motor racing's greatest ever Formula One drivers will be united with its most iconic racing team next year. So Lewis Hamilton will join Ferrari. It's likely to be the last act of his time in Grand Prix, but he said he was excited at his new challenge. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris reports.
Formula One's most successful driver. Soon to drive for the sport's most successful team. Signing for Ferrari, a bold move for Sir Lewis Hamilton. But daring manoeuvres are his hallmark on the track.
He chases the checkered flag. He wins the British Grand Prix.
It's how he's won 7 world championships. 6 of them with Mercedes since his last switch across the grid for McLaren in 2013. Hamilton said, "It's a place where I have grown up, so making the decision to leave was one of the hardest decisions I have ever had to make. But the time is right for me to take this step, and I'm excited to be taking on a new challenge."
He doesn't want to hang around to make up numbers, and maybe Ferrari is just that added spice that you need to give yourself motivate yourself one more time for another last push at it. And what a way to go out if you're with Ferrari.
This mega deal unites icons needing to revive glory days. Hamilton's lost the last 3 championships to Red Bull's Max Verstappen, and Ferrari is far from its days of dominance. The Italian grandees of Grand Prix last had a title winner in 2007, and so many of their titles were won by Michael Schumacher. How better for Hamilton to complete his career by overtaking the German great to become the outright record 8 times world champion. Here at Mercedes HQ, staff were gathered to be informed of Sir Lewis Hamilton's shock defection to Ferrari from 2025. So they've still got another year working together and a chance for Hamilton to go out on a high after 2 seasons without a Grand Prix success. Before taking up the Ferrari seat, Hamilton says he wants to make this season one to remember, with 100% commitment to Mercedes. There's more history to be made for the 39-year-old who's already established himself as the most successful driver in F1 history. Rob Harris, Sky News, Brackley.
Now to end the news at 10 tonight, the conclusion of a brief taste of freedom and a few days of fame for Honshu, the Japanese macaque monkey who escaped from a wildlife park in the Highlands. Well, on Sunday, the fugitive was caught on camera, sitting on a garden fence and taking nuts from a bird feeder after escaping from his enclosure. Then, on Tuesday, a drone using thermal imaging equipment located the macaque walking through woodland closer to the wildlife park. Then today, a visit to another garden and another bird feeder led to Honshu's capture. He was shot with a tranquilised dart. And he's now back at the wildlife park, where we were told he was to be checked by vets before having a good feed. Those nuts will be the undoing of him. That was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the columnists and broadcasters Steve Richards and Carol Malone. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the eye, their headline, millions face stealth tax rise as Tories demand cuts. We'll be right back. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Police are still hunting a suspect they believe carried out an attack with corrosive chemicals on a mother and her 2 children in London. The Bank of England has said the next move in interest rates is likely to be down after it left them unchanged at 5.25% today. And the US Defense Secretary has hinted retaliatory strikes are imminent following the deaths of 3 American soldiers in Jordan. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the economists and broadcasters, Carol Malone and Steve Richards. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Manhunt is the headline on the front of the Daily Mail as the alleged Clapham attacker is seen on CCTV with severe injuries to his face. The Telegraph also covers the nationwide manhunt as MPs call for the system to be overhauled after horrific assault. The front page of The Guardian covers the US retaliation in the Middle East as it orders strikes on Iran-backed militia in revenge for base attack. On the front page of the Financial Times, the Bank of England has opened the door to interest rate cuts, but said it required more evidence that inflation would continue to fall. The Times also leads with the Bank of England saying borrowing costs had peaked and inflation would fall to its target of 2% in the spring. The Eye leads with a story on a stealth tax that will drag millions into higher rates of income taxation, and the Chancellor cannot fully reverse it. In training sessions that cost £160,000, civil servants have been told that an eye roll in a meeting could be considered a microaggression. That story's on the front page of the Metro, and Carol's giggling at that.
I'm doing an eye roll right now.
The Mirror leads with an interview with Paul Gascoigne warning Man United striker Marcus Rashford not to make the same mistakes as him after the England star was spotted in a Belfast nightclub mid-week. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Steve Richards and Carol Malone. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the Mail. It's also in the Telegraph and several of the other papers. But this is the manhunt that's underway tonight. The story that we've broken on Abdul Ezedi is that he was granted asylum after a conviction, a sexual assault conviction in 2018. Steve, you take us into this story, first of all.
Yeah, well, I'm probably the wrong person to guide you through it because I find these stories unbearable. I can't read some of the details. I find it so horrific. So what I will do is, it's clearly, looking at the papers tonight, going to become partly an asylum-seeking story. So let me just counter how this is going to go by just pointing out one thing. If he is an Afghan and all the rest of it, the whole asylum debate is really complicated because if you remember a few years ago when Biden withdrew forces from Afghanistan and then Britain followed, the whole people were saying, we've got to... These Afghans who, have helped us, we've got to let them come here if they want to come. So that was the mood then. Now, following this horror, there's going to be a different mood. But that's why it's so complicated, and I can see that's going to become part of the story.
There should be a different mood after this. This is a guy who was twice turned down for asylum when he first came here, and there was probably very good reason for that, which is not documented here. But even when he came here, he was in Newcastle, and he was convicted of a sexual assault in Newcastle, and he's gone on to do this. And let's go back to what he actually did. I mean, this is. It's an obscenity. This is gender terrorism.
The alleged offence.
The alleged offence, OK. But, this really is gender terrorism. This is a violence that is, for 200 years, has been perpetrated by men upon women. It's not meant to kill them. It's meant to humiliate, disfigure, harm them for life. It's meant to blind them. And guys do this you know, they do this with the intention of doing all of that. Now, this story, I mean, how this happens in the middle of Clapham, I do not know. Where, you know, they're in a car, they get out, they're actually scrapping in the street. He's going for her in the street. At some point, this alkaline is thrown. And I was saying to Steve earlier, I had to look up what an alkaline corrosive was. And it sounds like it's the stuff you can buy in supermarkets or shops. You clean radiators with it, you clean drains with it. It's the stuff that's easily available anyway. So at some point, he throws this, and he throws it at the lady who is screaming that she can't see. You know, this stuff can blind people. It may well have blinded her. It hits his 8-year-old child. He then drags his baby out of the car, bangs the baby on the ground. This has been seen by witnesses and whatever. He also, at some point, gets back in the car and tries to run her over as well. You know, we can't be having this in the streets of this country. And if this,
we're looking at the footage now.
If it becomes a question about asylum, good. Because, you know, we have to have the right to deport criminals. This guy is a criminal. He came here illegally. He was eventually granted asylum because he convinced a priest to vouch for him that he'd become a Christian and a good man. He's clearly not a good man. And if he's found to be guilty of this, which it's looking now and say we can see what's going on, he should be got rid of. I mean, there's no question. We can't have blokes in this country who think that's an OK thing to do to women.
But obviously, at this moment, it's an alleged crime, and he hasn't been tried or convicted of this. I just wonder if either of you think that the asylum seeker detail is a bit of a red herring. This is a heinous crime.
It's heinous.
And if it was committed by anybody, it would be.
So that's what the
Does
point.
it matter that it might be an asylum seeker?
You can see how this story is going to go. It's going to kind of, well, not reignite because it's alive, the whole asylum debate and how you, in inverted commas, control the borders and so on. Whereas, as actually Carol has said, you know, there are blokes from anywhere capable of these horrors. So the degree to which you extrapolate from this a crisis over asylum, it is a huge, huge leap to make. And as I said, the mood in Britain a few years ago over Afghanistan was, oh, yeah, we need to let some of these people in, or else they're going to get killed in Afghanistan as American Britain leaves. And apply that to Syria, apply that to Ukraine, and it's just more complicated than because one individual has behaved in a way as I can't even read about. That we extrapolate more widely.
I think you're wrong about the story becoming about asylum straight away. I think the next leg will be why are these things so easily available? How can we just buy the sort of stuff that can maim and disfigure people? That would be probably, you know, the day after tomorrow, and then we'll go on to this. But you know, you're right, and a lot of Afghans were fleeing war and terror and persecution, all the rest of it. This guy is a bad egg. He'd be a bad egg in any country, but the fact is he happens to be from Afghanistan, and we don't want to have people like him in this country. You know, culturally, this is the norm in some countries, where they chuck acid in women's faces.
I don't think we can say it's the norm.
In places like Sri Lanka, it happens all the time.
But it's still illegal. It's not the norm.
Well, it's illegal. And around the world, the number of cases are reported are minuscule because women are too terrified in the countries where it is the norm to report it because they've had acid in their face in the beginning. If they report their husband for doing it or their boyfriend, they get
Carol,
worse.
I mean, when the Afghan story broke, that we were leaving, America were leaving, people did not say, we better watch it, because it's the norm to throw chemicals at women's faces.
No, we didn't, of course.
And because it's not.
No.
And we are dealing with this particular individual. It's unbearable. But as I'm pleased you think the next phase will be looking at what happened precisely in this case, rather than extrapolating more widely.
Well, if we look at the Telegraph, the headline is "Chemical Attacker was failed asylum seeker."
Well, exactly,
so
that's why
I think it's jumped over that phase, Carol, hasn't it?
But I suppose, you know, but the thing is, if someone is denied asylum, there's usually a very good reason, and I don't believe it's just because I'm sure we'll find out more in the days to come. If someone he tried twice to get it, he was turned down twice, and then he committed a crime here, and then he pretended that he'd become a good Christian. But you know, there are some people who culturally will never fit into this country, and men who abuse women in this way. When I say it's the norm in some countries, men can get away with this kind of abuse without being, you know, it might be illegal, but they're not going to be arrested by the police and chucked into a jail cell. It's just not going to happen. So I just think this is what we should be looking at. You know, that whether people like him fit in here. I don't think they do. When you have this kind of disrespect for women, no respect whatsoever, and you think it's okay to name them and
But
blind
if he wasn't an asylum seeker,
I'd still
what
say
would you be saying?
I would say chuck him in a jail cell and chuck away the key. And do you know that the maximum penalty for this is 11 years? So in this country, as it stands, no matter who you are or where you've come from, if you're a bit whatever, you get 11 years, and you'll probably be out after 4 or 5. That's what.
Steve, what you're saying, though, Steve?
I don't think anyone's arguing, Carol, that this guy does fit in here. I mean, everyone is horrified by this attack.
Will we
so
be
in
able
a way,
to get rid
I think
of him, do you think?
that there are, well.
But if he were born and bred here, would you still say he doesn't fit in here?
I would say he doesn't fit into a civilised society.
Right.
Chuck him in jail for a lot longer than 11 years.
Which is the same. Well, I mean, it's just to your point, Steve, that it is all going to be about his status now. In the Telegraph, we've got Sir John Hayes, former Home Office Minister, saying that he's going to be writing to James Cleverly to seek an urgent review of the asylum rules. This case provides an opportunity not only to review the criteria for granting asylum, but also for how we deal with those who are known criminals.
Yeah, so you're right. We've already leapt over precisely what happened in this case. Rejected twice, accepted third time. So all of that forgotten about as we go into another debate about asylum. And no doubt Rwanda will come into this very soon and all sorts of things. But this is one case, horrendous, and everyone agrees it's horrendous. So everything else around it, it's typical of Britain at the moment, becomes stirred up almost unnecessarily because everyone agrees. No one's saying he fits in here, this maniac. But, as you note, immediately, day 2 of this story, and the headlines are about asylum, and it will generate...
Maybe the real trouble will come is if he gets convicted of this and we're not able to deport him. That, I think, is when the real trouble will start, because that is a problem we have now. We cannot deport known criminals. We can't deport murderers. We can't deport rapists. So I think that's going to cause a huge problem if and when he's convicted. OK,
let's just turn our attention. We've just got, I think, time probably just one more story before we go to the break. Let's have a look at the Financial Times. Take us into this story, Steve. This is the Bank of England setting the stage for rate cuts. This is positive news, is it not?
Well, it kind of... It is part of the context, really, of the economy and the election and whether... It's very interesting. The Bank of England, since 1997, has had the power to decide interest rates and set interest rates. And ministers, of course, will ache for interest rate cuts and for inflation to fall, but it's not wholly in their power. The Bank of England is to decide, and evidently they want more evidence about inflation, which has been falling and falling substantially. But, there are all kinds of things, labour shortages, which mean wage rises, which could mean price rises. And so it's all in the balance, I think, at the moment.
A lot of the financial analysts, today were saying Bailey should have cut it by a quarter. It should have taken the rate to 5%. I think Alex Brum in the Mail called Bailey, and he called him his timid little group of economists. He says it would, because he said that would have put confidence back into consumers, into businesses. He said it would have put the burner under a house market that's reviving. We are doing, when the UK is not in terribly bad shape, where even the doom-mongering IMF are saying that we're going to have, the growth, I think, the highest in the G7 in the next 2 years. So it would have actually just made everyone feel better. It would have made people saying, oh, God, better times ahead. But there is Bailey. Again, he's always behind the curve. I mean, I don't know how this guy's still got a job. I really don't.
There is some evidence the UK is in quite a bad shape, Carol. Low productivity and so on. And I can understand the caution. I think they've called it wrong quite often, but I can understand at the moment things aren't at all clear about, which way to move if you're
But if he
running the
holds
Bank of England.
If he holds them, because I mean, I know that a lot of the sources are saying he's talking about a cut the next time, but he's not actually said that.
No.
You know, he's just said things could happen in the world could fall in. So he's actually given himself a good excuse to get out of it if something happens. But, you know, if he keeps them static too long, surely that's going to take us into a recession if he keeps them.
Could do.
Yeah.
Could do.
And that is another problem. That doesn't give confidence in us to, you know, to the rest of the world.
Oh dear, we started off on a positive and now
I know, we've gone down.
We've talked ourselves right down. Thank you very much for the minute, Stephen Carroll. More coming up from the papers, including this from The Guardian. Labour to abandon £28 billion green promise. We'll be right back with more. Do stay with us if you can.
There's been a survey done on our favourite cities outside of Europe. Of course, city breaks synonymous generally with short-haul travel. These are much longer destinations, and Australia has totally cleared the board and has won with several cities coming top.
Three, in fact.
Top three, yes.
Yeah,
Sydney, Perth
and Melbourne.
And Melbourne, yeah. I think it's quite interesting that the whole survey, what's always really interesting with these things is the story behind it. And, you know, I think it says a lot about perhaps the people who were surveyed that Australia's come out top. You know, I mean, that's a long way to go for a city break. And actually, the US hasn't done quite so well, which is perhaps unfair, but perhaps reflective of one of the criteria, which is value. And of course,
expensive to go to the US.
It's very expensive. It's actually no less expensive to go to Australia now as well. But I think the perception of if you are going to go to Australia, you've saved for it, it's perhaps a once in a lifetime, twice in a lifetime trip. Whereas the US, much more accessible, lots more people go there. And if you've been recently, you will have had a big shock at how far your money no longer goes.
Another one on the list, Kyoto. Have you been to Kyoto?
No.
Have you been to Kyoto?
I have been to Kyoto.
What did you think?
I thought it was absolutely incredible. I mean, it's just such a different culture, a different world. There's so many beautiful buildings, absolutely extraordinary. Golden Temple there. It's one of the most incredible gardens. And the food, of course, is just absolutely...
I think it's, I mean, it's definitely a very well-preserved part of Japan, really. If we're talking about value, though,
yes,
we like to look beyond those first cities, beyond the capital cities, to more affordable alternatives. And actually, Kyoto is very definitely recommended, but if you wanted something that's very buzzy at the moment, you could look at Seoul, for example.
Seoul?
Yeah. Back to the US, you talked about Chicago. I mean, how about Philadelphia? It's just always really worth looking beyond the obvious for those value equations, because if what you want is a city experience, I mean, obviously it's not going to work if you've got something very specific on your wish list that you want to tick off. But if you just want to go, you have great food, experience a city in that country, look at those second cities.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, the columnists and broadcasters, Carol Malone and Steve Richards. You're like twins.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at this story in The Guardian. Let's do a bit of politics, shall we? And we read that Labour are to abandon their £28 billion green promise. Steve, tell us what this is about.
Well, you've probably done this on the press preview about 10 times.
Yeah.
It appears in one story or one newspaper or another most days at the moment, the briefing that they're going to dump it, and The Guardian's got a bit more detail. There's going to be a third of what they had argued for and before. They basically got into a real mess over this. And I think there would have been, right from the beginning, if they had stuck with it, a relatively robust thing, that they have to have these strict fiscal rules. The bar's set much higher for Labour. It's very unfair. But within those, they could say our plan is, and our hope is, to raise the £28 billion for this recovery thing, which will in turn lead to growth, and keep to that line and excite people with it, but say we're grown-ups, we're going to be honest, and we're going to win back trust, and say we can't guarantee this because we have no idea precisely what the circumstances will be throughout the whole of this Parliament. No one does. And kind of ended at that. But instead they've got into this thing, will it be 28 billion? Will it not be? And each day someone briefs that it won't be. And it kind of sounds negative and weak and defensive, as if they're so frightened of these Tories who are 28 points behind in some opinion polls. So I think they've mishandled the whole thing, frankly. And it's not over yet, because this is a briefing from behind the scenes. No doubt there'll be some formal thing, even though they've all said it in effect in recent months. So it's messy.
Yes, and it's definitely they're ditching the policy, and a flagship policy.
This is just typical, isn't it? When you're in opposition for as long as they have been, you can make all these grand promises and all these, come out with all these amazing policies that look really attractive for people. And now the reality is hitting home with Labour, because they are probably going to get in come the election, and they're realising that everything they said. I mean, how many of these 10 policies, what do you call it, his 10 pledges, has he kept? He's had to row back on most of them. Tuition fees, reforming tax credits, all that stuff. He can't do any of it now.
But you see, this is a more recent announcement from Rachel Reeves a couple of years ago. And there is another reality that they're competing, or the UK is, with the EU and America. Biden's gone very big on this, and borrowed money to do it, albeit with that stronger protective ring of the dollar.
Got about 20 seconds, because I know that Carol likes this story.
Okay.
Metro.
Oh, sorry.
We're going to end on that. And this is the eye-rolling at work that could be deemed as aggressive, a microaggression.
This is just ridiculous. The government has spent 160 grand on advising staff not to roll their eyes at people, because it's an aggressive thing, apparently. And people have been sent on these courses. I mean, what a waste of taxpayers' money. It's outrageous.
Okay.
And everyone who's been on the course has said, stupid waste of time, waste of money.
I'm rolling my eyes now, because we're completely out of time. We're completely out of time. Thank you both for taking us through the papers. We'll see you in the next hour. Let's take a look at the weather now for you.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the next few days will be rather dull and damp, but there'll be some brightness in the windy north at times. Low cloud will be quite extensive at first tomorrow, bringing fog and drizzly outbreaks to some coasts and hills. It'll be windy too, especially in the north. It'll stay mostly grey through the morning, with the best of any brightness to the east of high ground. There'll be further patchy rain or drizzle, mainly for western coasts and hills, while northwest Scotland and northwest Ireland will see more general rain later on. It'll turn mild again, but windy, with coastal gales in the north.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.